Here we are at the end of another week, another momentous week, and we made it. We made it. So let me just begin where we always begin, and that is with what's going on in Gaza. I just want to make a quick mention of an Israeli strike in Gaza. This week has been a deadly week, killing, we're reporting between 19 and 24 people, mostly women and children. 5 children in particular have been killed. And mediators are actually decrying the continued strikes as they work through the elements of the so-called ceasefire. But a 5-month-old baby dead, and a baby who's just been on the planet for 10 days dead, 7 women dead. So we still see the violence. Israel continues, the IDF continues to bomb Gaza. So the humanitarian crisis, even with the opening of Rafah, it's still there. So keep your eyes on that conflict, please, because the horror continues. Well, in our own country, we're still grappling with Donald Trump's chaos. Of course, the Epstein files are top of mind, and they're not going away. No matter what Donald Trump says, the Epstein files will continue to capture the imagination of the American people because it's a kind of tangled web of rich, powerful men, debauched, cruel men who raped and abused young women and girls. There's political intrigue here, because not only they're rich and powerful, they're politically connected. It's global, from Poland to Norway to the UK to Lithuania to Sweden to Russia to Israel. And, the sorts of folks who have been caught up as people make their way through the 3 million document dump from Bill Gates to the lying Litkoff to lying Elon Musk to even Noam Chomsky. And so we find ourselves grappling with what this means. Of course, it gives us, the sundry details of the life of the rich and famous. But I think it cuts much deeper than that. This was a prostitution ring, an extensive bribery network, international intrigue, because political leaders from across the globe caught up in this evil. That's what we can call it. And so this isn't going anywhere. And there's still millions of files left, hundreds of thousands of files that we haven't seen. And Donald Trump is implicated. He can say whatever he wants to say. He's closely implicated in this mess. And it just saddens me. I think you can feel it in my spirit. The world is getting the best of me these days. And, you have to allow that feeling not to overwhelm, but you have to recognize it. Those days when it's very difficult to smile, very difficult to see the other side of this. You go from the death of a 10-day-old baby, right, to building concentration camps across the country, to these files that show unadulterated evil, in my view. Rich white men and some others apparently abusing young girls. And so let's keep track of this. And we don't have to worry about it leaving the news. I mean, no matter what Stephen Bannon is doing, he's caught up in it too. No matter what his base, Donald Trump's base, is motivated by this pedophile ring, so-called Pizzagate, the code word for these perverted rich white men. This story isn't going anywhere, Donald Trump. And it's impacting the country and at a level that I don't think we've quite talked about yet. There's been discussion about the deep distrust of political institutions, how that distrust has impacted the functioning of American democracy. But I think this distrust cuts beyond institutions. I don't think it's just limited to elites. I think it leads to a kind of deep cynicism about the quality of life in this country, about the moral character of America itself. I know that seems to be a large leap, but I want to just emphasize that the Epstein files isn't just a kind of, salacious story about perverted rich white men with power. It cuts to the heart of I think, a deep-seated skepticism among American people, a seeping and creeping skepticism among the American people about the American experiment itself. So let's keep our eye on this, right? Now, as the Epstein files continue to metastasize in relation to our imaginations, Donald Trump is going to throw everything against the wall in order to get it off the front page, to get it off the fold, right? To turn our attention away from the story that implicates him and his rich friends, the ones who are making money hand over fist. And we saw that with his talk about nationalizing the election. I mean, Donald Trump is clear about his intentions. He doesn't believe he lost the election in 2020. Well, let's be clear. Yes, he did. He just continues to lie about it or to bullshit about it. Remember the distinction we made last time? So there is this attempt to move the story of Epstein off the Epstein files off the front page, combined with setting the stage for stealing the midterms, because if he knows that if the Democrats gain control over the House of Representatives, they're going to call members of the Trump administration to the Congress. There's going to be investigation after investigation after investigation. And even though it might generate a constitutional crisis where the executive branch ignores the power of the legislative branch, it's going to gum up everything. He's already said out loud, if they win, they're going to impeach him. Because he knows his hand is in the cookie jar. He knows what he's done and what he continues to do. All of them do. But at the same time, these folk, I want to say this because oftentimes we reduce it to Donald Trump. These folk are committed to undermining American democracy as such. I've said in the past that Donald Trump is the carnival barker. They allow him his grift, his corruption, his revenge, his retribution, right, while all the trains are running. So there is this concerted effort to change the very direction of the country. And that change is rooted in a very autocratic, neo-fascist agenda. Right? Remember, we talked about that toxic brew of greed, selfishness, and hatred. Ideologically, right? Its impact, its effect is to corrode the very foundations of American democracy, to corrode any effort to hold power accountable, any idea of self-governance. So even though Donald Trump is in trouble, these folk are going to want to steal the election. They're going to want to cheat so that they can maintain power, because they're not interested in democracy as such. Their only interest is the will to power, to wield it, to control it, to keep it. So Steve Bannon, in addition to Tulsi Gabbard being down in Atlanta and the FBI seizure of ballots and the like in the Fulton County Election Commission, right? The Missouri prosecutor, right, charged to do it all. We know that they're put in place the infrastructure to undermine democratic life. And remember, Donald Trump is clear as he signals. He doesn't dog whistle. He blows a foghorn. It's Detroit, it's Philadelphia, it's Atlanta, places where black people vote, right? Places where black people vote. Well, Steve Bannon says that he wants to deploy ICE outside of voting stations to intimidate voters, to intimidate voters. Now, mind you, we still have the Supreme Court talking about going to deal with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We still have the Supreme Court having to render its decision around birthright citizenship. This is an all-out assault on the idea of a multiracial democracy. This is all-out assault on democracy itself. And he's doing it right in front of our eyes. Mark Elias at Democracy Docket has been telling us about how he's been ramping up to steal the 2026 election and to undermine the 2028 election. And Bannon is at the heart of it. He was at the heart of it before. He's still at the heart of it. Remember his maximalist strategy to overwhelm us, right? To flood the zone as they pursue their agenda with extraordinary efficiency. So Eli Mistel is right. The Democratic Party has to be ready. We hear Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan and others preparing themselves for what's coming. But, this is a Category 5, Category 6 storm on the way in November. So Democrats, I think Eli Mistel is right. They need to appoint something like an election czar, someone who is laser focused on developing a strategy to respond to what the Trump administration, to what MAGA is preparing to do, because they've already set the stage. He's delegitimizing the process. He's deepening distrust. He's already putting in place the mechanisms to affect how votes are counted. And they are engaged already in trying to determine who can vote and who cannot vote. We're seeing voter purges, at least gestures toward it. Remember in Memphis, when suddenly people wanted to see whether or not they were registered and there was a computer glitch, they weren't there, and then suddenly they got it there. So we know there's some shenanigans afoot. So let's be clear. You can see it's a rough time. It's the accumulated effect of all of this. Every week we get together and we talk. And every week we have to grapple with this nonsense. And every time I sit here and think about it, I just I'm flabbergasted at times, at least in these dark moments, of how decent people are allowing this to happen. Trump lies every single day. He's bullshitting the American people every single day. And the people around him in the political arena in Washington, D.C. seem to think that bullshit won't take hold, won't have an effect as they appeal to process, as they do what they do. I know folk are battling. I know folk are struggling, but it gets to be too much on certain days. From the Epstein files to the nationalization of elections to what's going on in Minneapolis. Yes, they try to engage in a kind of rebranding, to change the face of what ICE was doing in Minneapolis. I don't know how you say that. You go from Bongivino to I think that's his name, to Tom Homan. Right. Can you imagine Holman's reasonableness in this moment? Jesus King. You draw down ICE and Border Patrol agents from, by 700, but you still leave 2,300 of them in the Twin Cities. More than 3 times the size of the police force in Minneapolis. Twice the size of the police force combined of St. Paul and Minneapolis, it seems to me. And, the reporting coming out of the Twin Cities, the disappearance of children, the disappearing of children from 5 to 17, how they're snatching babies and flying them within 2 days to Texas. The evil You have to use a certain kind of moral language in this moment. It seems to me the political language isn't sufficient to capture what we are experiencing. This is evil. And I use the word evil in a way that doesn't necessarily commit you to certain kinds of religious commitments, but it's really to describe the scope of what we're experiencing, that it's not just a political reality, it's a reality that affects who we take ourselves to be, the very character of our humanity, as it were. And they're doing it in your name. They're doing it in your name. I kept thinking about Liam Ramos. And of course, with his bunny hat that he can make the ears move, snatched him up. That gets sick while he's in the detention center in Texas. They finally get him released, and everybody's overjoyed about his release. And these sick-ass people file a motion seeking to end the asylum claims of Liam's family. They're holding the hearing today. Sick, morally corrupt monsters. And the only thing I can think about is, even though he's not in detention, as I think about all of those children from 5 to 17 who are in detention centers in Texas and around the country, I think about the loss of their innocence. Look in Liam's eyes. It's something about this country, its history, right? Where it seems, willing to steal the innocence of babies, to darken their eyes, to snatch their childhood away from them by forcing them to experience or witness unimaginable cruelty. Liam has been indelibly marked by this. I wonder what he dreams. I wonder what he feels in his bones, in the marrow of his bone. He doesn't quite have a language yet to make sense of it all. But what we know is that ICE, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, and all of those who signed on to this mayhem stole his innocence. And they're stealing the innocence of babies daily. Daily. So we can rejoice in the fact that he's not in the detention center, right, in Texas, but we own his trauma. They own his trauma. They own his trauma, and we must tend to it. We must tend to these babies, it seems to me. My God. It makes the days difficult, these dark days difficult. And I keep asking myself, why? All because they want to be white without judgment. All because, as Baldwin said, they want to justify the slaughter. And they're willing to abide this man who can't complete a sentence, it seems to me. A man who, by any measure or standard, is morally depraved. You heard what he said at the National Prayer Service. We know what he's been doing, how he lies repeatedly. He now it has come out that he wanted Penn Station named after himself. He wants Dulles Airport named after himself. Trump is trying to ensure that he cannot be erased. He wants to plant himself on the built environment of Washington, D.C. He wants to be on the built environment, from the ballroom to the archway to a statue of Christopher Columbus in front of the White House. He wants his stamp placed on the country. And what that involves is not only his moral depravity, his rejection of democracy as such, right? It's also bound up with his nostalgic longing for a white world. For a white world that dominated all others, a white world in which people like me played their minor bit parts, a white world that declared that they themselves were the superior human beings. My God. So what have we seen? What have we seen? We've seen the removal of outdoor plaques and other materials that told the story of slavery at the site of the first president, at the site of the former president at Independence Hall. A judge appointed by George W. Bush just flabbergasted by this effort to erase history. We see this moment in Jackson, Mississippi, published by that wonderful, I'm on the board, but the wonderful publication, Mississippi Today, around the home of Medgar Evers. Think about, I'm going to read from the article. It says, the Park Service had pulled the brochures in anticipation of replacing them with a new version. Pulled the brochures describing Medgar Evers and what happened to him. It would remove the word racist to describe the Klansman, the killer, Byron de la Beckwith. Can you imagine? They don't want even to call him racist. They don't even want to talk about the 9 people who were enslaved, right, in the house where the President of the United States lived on Independence Mall. They don't even want you to understand that, right? They don't even want to mention the blood that Medgar Evers was lying in a pool of blood after he was assassinated. Just redact history altogether. And as I'm thinking about how deeply racist all of this stuff is, this effort to redact the history, Donald Trump then has the nerve to post on Truth Social an image of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama as monkeys. As monkeys. And that's not disqualifying? What does that say to us? What does that say to you and me? What does that say about us? It's time to stop beating around the bush. It's not that he said something racist or he posted something racist. Donald Trump is racist. White nationalists have control over the executive branch of this country.